Imagine the clang of steel echoing across a misty battlefield, the thunder of hooves shaking the ground beneath, and the fierce eyes of knights scanning the horizon for their next opponent. It's easy to picture them as larger-than-life figures locked in epic duels, yet the reality of how knights actually wielded their weapons in battle is far more intricate, strategic, and surprisingly human than the romanticized images in movies and novels. Welcome to a journey into the armored world of medieval warriors, where every sword swing, lance, thrust, and battle axe strike was not just about brute strength, but about technique, timing, and the subtle understanding of human anatomy and enemy psychology. Before we dive deeper into this fascinating history, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story that brings the past vividly to life. And let every knight whisper to you. Knights of the medieval era, particularly from the 11th to the 15th centuries, were highly trained soldiers who spent years mastering not only their martial skills, but also the art of battlefield tactics. Contrary to popular belief, their weapon choices were not random. Each weapon had a specific purpose, shaped by the armor of the time, the battlefield conditions, and the type of opponent they faced. The sword, often seen as the quintessential knightly weapon, was not simply a tool for slashing. Medieval swords were designed for balance and precision. Heavy, two-handed swords, such as the longsword, allowed for powerful strikes capable of splitting through lighter armor, but they required skill to maneuver effectively. One-handed swords paired with shields were perfect for close-quarters combat, offering protection while allowing the knight to stab or slash at openings in an enemy's armor. Interestingly, historical accounts suggest that knights often aimed for the gaps in armor, such as under the armpits, behind the knees, and through the joints of gauntlets, rather than trying to hack through solid plate. This required immense patience, precision, and an almost scientific understanding of human anatomy. Lances, on the other hand, were the ultimate shock weapons, used primarily by mounted knights during charges. A well-executed lance charge could break enemy formations and turn the tide of battle, but it demanded impeccable timing, coordination with fellow knights, and control over a powerful, sometimes unpredictable, warhorse. Medieval manuals described the importance of the angle of impact when striking with a lance, ensuring that the force was concentrated to maximize damage while minimizing the risk of losing control or falling. The lance was often complemented by secondary weapons like swords or maces for the chaos that followed after the initial clash, demonstrating how knights had to seamlessly switch between weapons based on battlefield dynamics. Axes and maces, although less glamorous than swords, were deadly against heavily armored opponents. A warhammer or mace could deliver concussive force that bypassed the toughest plate armor, often incapacitating enemies without needing to penetrate their defenses. These weapons required explosive bursts of strength, strategic swings, and a keen sense of timing. Unlike the cinematic portrayal of knights endlessly swinging their axes in wide arcs, historical fighting techniques emphasized precision, targeting vulnerable points, and using momentum and leverage to overcome the opponent. Interestingly, historical evidence shows that knights were not purely offensive fighters, they were tactical thinkers. Medieval combat treatises, like those of Fiore de Liberi and Johannes Liechtenauer, reveal detailed techniques for grappling, disarming opponents, and using the weight of armor to an advantage. Knights trained in half-swording, a method where they would grip their swords by the blade with one hand to thrust precisely through gaps in armor, or wrestling in armor, which involved throws and holds designed to neutralize an opponent when conventional strikes were ineffective. This paints a picture of a battlefield not just filled with clashing metal, but a complex dance of strategy, anticipation, and quick thinking. Horseback combat introduced another layer of complexity. Mounted knights had to coordinate with squires, foot soldiers, and fellow cavalry to maintain formation and momentum. Communication relied on hand signals, horn calls, and prearranged maneuvers, showing that the effectiveness of a knight was as much about teamwork and discipline as individual prowess. Cavalry charges were not chaotic flurries of motion. They were carefully planned maneuvers where timing, speed, and formation integrity could decide victory or defeat. Archery and crossbows also played an important role in shaping a knight's tactics. While knights are often imagined solely as close combat warriors, the reality was that the battlefield was layered with threats. Knights had to understand how to protect themselves against missile fire, use terrain to their advantage, and integrate with ranged units. Historical records describe how knights would time their advances to minimize exposure to arrows, using shields, body positioning, and movement to reduce vulnerability. This adaptability highlights the fact that medieval warfare was as much about situational awareness and problem-solving as it was about strength and courage. Training for knights was rigorous and lifelong. From a young age, pages and squires practiced weapon drills, horsemanship, and battlefield tactics under the watchful eyes of experienced warriors. Sparring matches simulated real combat conditions, often in full armor, honing reflexes, endurance, and tactical thinking. Historical accounts suggest that a well-trained knight could execute complex maneuvers under pressure, adapt to changing circumstances, and exploit the weaknesses of less disciplined opponents, demonstrating the incredible depth of martial skill behind the romanticized image of chivalric duels. Armor itself played a crucial role in shaping weapon use. Knights had to balance protection with mobility. Plate armor was designed to deflect blows, but heavy armor could fatigue the wearer quickly. This made energy-efficient techniques, precise strikes, and strategic positioning essential. Knights learned to use the weight and articulation of their armor to enhance defensive maneuvers while delivering calculated offensive moves. The interaction between weapon and armor created a continuous evolution of technique, where every sword, mace, or lance strike was a calculated choice informed by centuries of battlefield experience. Understanding how knights actually used their weapons also requires acknowledging the psychological dimension of combat. Fear, adrenaline, and morale played as much a role as skill and training. Knights had to remain composed under extreme stress, make split-second decisions, and often engage in brutal hand-to-hand combat, where hesitation could mean death. The mastery of weapons was therefore intertwined with mental fortitude, discipline, and a deep understanding of human behavior in high-stakes situations. So, when you imagine knights on the battlefield, picture more than just heroic swings and dramatic duels. Envision disciplined warriors whose lives depended on mastery of weaponry, precise tactics, and strategic thinking. From the calculated thrusts of a longsword to the thunderous impact of a lance, every action was purposeful, honed through years of training, and adapted to the chaotic realities of medieval warfare. And that is why the story of knights and their weapons remains endlessly fascinating, offering insights into human ingenuity, courage, and the relentless pursuit. As the battlefield unfolded, the reality of combat was often far more chaotic and brutal than the orderly depictions in paintings or films. Knights had to constantly adapt to changing circumstances, reacting not only to enemy movements, but also to terrain, weather, and the actions of their allies. One of the most fascinating aspects of medieval warfare is how knights combined weapon mastery with battlefield strategy to maintain an advantage. For instance, while the lance was lethal during a cavalry charge, its effectiveness depended heavily on coordination with infantry and supporting cavalry units. Historical records from battles like Agincourt and Crécy highlight that even the most skilled knights could be neutralized by disciplined foot soldiers armed with longbows or pikes if their approach was poorly timed or miscalculated. This interplay of offense and defense underscores how knights were not just fighters, but sophisticated tacticians. Understanding the use of palermes is essential to grasp the breadth of a knight's arsenal. Weapons such as halberds, glaives, and poleaxes were designed to extend reach, deliver concussive force, and exploit the weaknesses of heavily armored foes. Unlike swords, which demanded close proximity, palermes allowed knights to strike from a slight distance, maintaining safety while delivering precise, debilitating blows. Instructional manuals from the period describe the half-sword technique in combination with palermes, where the knight could guide the weapon with one hand on the blade to thrust into gaps in armor. This method required strength, dexterity, and a sharp eye for an opponent's vulnerability. The integration of multiple weapon types in a knight's repertoire demonstrates their adaptability. No single weapon could dominate the battlefield on its own. Close quarters combat brought another layer of complexity. Grappling, tripping, and throwing an opponent were essential skills for knights in hand-to-hand encounters. A well-timed push or sweep could destabilize a foe, creating an opening for a sword or mace strike. Historical treatises emphasize the importance of leverage and balance. A knight had to use the momentum of their opponent's attack to gain advantage, rather than relying solely on brute force. This insight into medieval fighting reveals the sophisticated martial science behind what appears, at first glance, to be chaotic combat. Every move was calculated, every strike deliberate, and every defensive maneuver rooted in an understanding of human biomechanics. Shields played a dual role on the battlefield. While primarily used for protection against sword blows, arrows, and spears, they were also offensive tools. Knights could bash opponents, knock enemies off balance, and create openings for weapon strikes. Kite shields, heater shields, and pavises each had unique advantages depending on the combat scenario, whether mounted or on foot. Historical accounts note that some knights would deliberately angle their shields to deflect blows in a way that could push an opponent into a disadvantageous position, turning defensive equipment into a tactical weapon. The coordination of weapon usage and armor protection became even more critical in the chaos of large-scale battles. Unlike one-on-one duels, medieval battlefields were crowded, noisy, and deadly. Knights had to navigate through dense formations, avoid friendly casualties, and respond to sudden threats from multiple directions. This required extraordinary situational awareness and communication. Signals, flags, and horns allowed knights to coordinate attacks or retreats. while visual and auditory cues from the environment guided split-second decisions about which weapon to deploy. It was a mental as well as physical challenge, demanding endurance, alertness, and an intimate understanding of both the enemy and one's own forces. The psychological impact of weapon mastery cannot be overstated. A knight wielding a heavy warhammer or a gleaming longsword inspired fear in opponents before any physical engagement occurred. Medieval chroniclers often describe the morale effect of seeing armored cavalry approach, weapons raised and banners flying. Knights understood that the threat alone could disrupt formations and force weaker opponents into mistakes, making the battlefield as much a contest of nerves as of skill. Even the sound of the metal-and-metal clash could intimidate, creating hesitation and opening the door for decisive strikes. Interestingly, knights often modified their fighting techniques based on the type of enemy they faced. Against lightly armored foes, speed and agility took precedence, favoring rapid sword strikes or spear thrusts. Against heavily armored opponents, the emphasis shifted to concussive blows with maces or warhammers, aiming to incapacitate rather than pierce. Some knights carried multiple weapons, switching between them seamlessly as the battle evolved. This versatility required rigorous training, strategic thinking, and the ability to read the battlefield in real time, highlighting the intellectual demands of medieval warfare. Environmental awareness was another crucial factor. Battlegrounds were rarely flat and predictable. Hills, mud, rivers, and forests all affected movement, visibility, and weapon effectiveness. Knights learned to exploit terrain advantages, positioning themselves to maximize momentum in charges or to force opponents into disadvantageous spots. Cavalry charges were carefully timed with the slope of the ground and the formation of enemy lines. Archers and infantry were coordinated to create choke points or disrupt enemy formations. In this way, weapon use was intertwined with geography, demonstrating that the knight's art was not confined to personal skill alone, but extended to strategic mastery of the environment. Training regimes for knights were intense and lifelong. Even after years of formal instruction, continuous practice was essential to maintain peak proficiency. Jousting tournaments, often thought to be purely ceremonial, served a practical purpose in honing reflexes, testing endurance, and practicing combat maneuvers under pressure. Sparring with peers allowed knights to refine techniques for different weapons, from the long reach of a spear to the precision thrusts of a sword. The repetition of drills in full armor ensured that movements became instinctive, critical in the chaos of real combat, where hesitation could be fatal. Moreover, knights were taught to anticipate and exploit human behavior. Feints, deceptive movements, and psychological tactics were integral to combat. A sudden retreat might lure an opponent into an overextended position, while a calculated pause could draw a strike that opened a gap in their defense. Historical records emphasize the mental acuity required. Battles were contests of observation and decision-making, as much as strength and endurance. Understanding the opponent's tendencies, predicting reactions, and adjusting tactics on the fly separated the most effective knights from the average warrior. In essence, the reality of how knights used their weapons reveals a sophisticated martial culture. It was a world where swords, lances, axes, and maces were tools in a larger system of strategy, coordination, and mental acuity. Every swing, thrust, and block was informed by years of practice, observation, and understanding of human physiology and psychology. Knights were not mere brutes in armor. They were disciplined, versatile, and highly intelligent fighters who combined physical skill with tactical insight to survive and succeed on some of history's most brutal battlefields. This exploration into their weapon use deepens our appreciation for the skill, discipline, and adaptability that defined the medieval knight. They were not just symbols of chivalry and romance. They were professionals whose lives depended on precise, informed action under extreme pressure. Their legacy endures not merely in tales of heroic duels, but in the remarkable martial artistry that they perfected through centuries of innovation and experience. And that is why the story of knights, their weapons, and the strategies behind every strike remains endlessly compelling for anyone fascinated by history, warfare, and human ingenuity. By the time a knight entered the thick of combat, every aspect of their training, equipment, and strategy was tested to its limits. Unlike the glorified duels of popular imagination, most medieval battles involved chaos, confusion, and rapid shifts in momentum. Knights had to move fluidly between mounted and dismounted combat, adapt to the unexpected movements of enemies, and respond to environmental hazards such as muddy terrain, uneven ground, or sudden obstacles. Their ability to wield weapons effectively under these conditions was a combination of rigorous physical conditioning, refined technique, and psychological resilience. Historical records emphasize that even a brief lapse in concentration could prove fatal, making focus as vital as strength. To fully appreciate this, imagine a knight charging at full speed with a lance, dodging obstacles, anticipating counterattacks, and preparing to switch seamlessly to a sword or maceall in the span of a few seconds. It was a high-stakes dance of precision, timing, and courage. Longswords, often romanticized in literature, were, in reality, highly versatile instruments of war. Their balance allowed for slashing, thrusting, and defensive maneuvers, while techniques like half-swording enabled knights to exploit armor gaps with lethal efficiency. Manuals from medieval fencing masters describe intricate sequences of attack and defense, emphasizing footwork, body alignment, and grip control. Far from being brute weapons, swords required a sophisticated understanding of leverage and angles, as well as the ability to read an opponent's intent in real time. For knights, mastery of the longsword was both an art and a science, blending physical skill with tactical insight. Axes, warhammers, and maces filled a complementary role in a knight's arsenal. While swords were precise and elegant, these weapons were designed to overcome the defensive advantages of plate armor. The concentrated impact of a mace, for instance, could stun or incapacitate a fully armored opponent, turning what might have been a stalemate into a decisive advantage. Effective use of these weapons required knowledge of biomechanics and timing. A misplaced swing could leave the knight vulnerable. Historical depictions and surviving treatises indicate that strikes were often calculated and targeted, rather than wild or haphazard, demonstrating the disciplined approach knights took even under extreme stress. The lance, wielded during mounted charges, was arguably the most iconic of knightly weapons. However, its effectiveness relied on precise technique, formation coordination, and battlefield awareness. A successful charge could break enemy lines, disrupt formations, and inflict significant casualties, but it demanded rigorous training for both rider and horse. Knights practiced controlling powerful war horses at high speeds while maintaining balance and accuracy with a long, heavy weapon. The slightest miscalculation could lead to a disastrous fall or failed strike. Historical accounts highlight that cavalry maneuvers were not spontaneous acts of heroism, but the result of disciplined planning, synchronized action, and careful observation of enemy positioning. Close quarters encounters often forced knights to grapple, throw, or disarm opponents. This dimension of combat, sometimes overlooked in popular portrayals, required incredible strength, skill, and understanding of leverage. Treatises from the period describe techniques for wrestling in armor, using joint locks, and turning an opponent's momentum against them. Such encounters were physical chess games where the knight's mental acuity was as important as brute force. Even in the frenzy of battle, knights had to remain calm, calculate openings, and execute techniques with precision, demonstrating a level of tactical sophistication often unappreciated by modern audiences. Shields played a multifaceted role beyond simple defense. Depending on type kite, heater, or round, they could be used to deflect blows, create openings for strikes, and protect the knight and allies. Historical accounts mention coordinated shield formations among groups of knights or infantry, illustrating that teamwork and spatial awareness were crucial to survival. A shield bash could disrupt an opponent's balance, leaving them vulnerable to follow-up attacks. Thus, shields were not merely passive protection, but active instruments in combat strategy. The psychological dimension of weapon use cannot be understated. Knights faced not only physical threats, but also the stress and fear inherent in life-and-death combat. Maintaining composure, anticipating enemy moves, and exploiting psychological weaknesses were all integral to successful fighting. Feints, deceptive movements, and sudden bursts of aggression were used deliberately to unnerve opponents, showing that medieval combat was as much about the mind as the body. Chroniclers often note the intimidation effect of knights' armor, banners, and weapons, suggesting that psychological warfare was a key component of battlefield success. Environmental conditions further influenced weapon deployment. Muddy fields, narrow passes, and forested areas dictated movement and weapon choice. Knights had to adapt strategies depending on terrain, sometimes abandoning the lance in favor of swords or maces when charges were impossible. Coordination with infantry and ranged units became vital in such scenarios. This adaptability underscores the complexity of knightly combat. Weapons were not just tools, but components of a larger, dynamic system of warfare that included terrain, teamwork, and situational awareness. Training and preparation for knights were lifelong commitments. From the earliest days as pages and squires, they engaged in rigorous exercises designed to simulate the intensity of real combat. Sparring in full armor, horseback maneuvers, and weapon drills ensured that every action became instinctive. Even after decades of experience, knights continued to refine techniques, learn new strategies, and adapt to evolving battlefield technologies. This relentless pursuit of mastery demonstrates the high level of professionalism and dedication required to survive and excel in medieval warfare. Finally, it's important to recognize the interplay of honor, ethics, and practical combat. While medieval knights are often idealized as paragons of chivalry, their approach to weapon use was grounded in pragmatism. Efficiency, survival, and effectiveness were prioritized alongside ideals of courage and honor. Historical narratives and battle accounts reveal that knights' decisions in combat were guided by both moral codes and tactical necessity, blending the idealized image of the warrior with the stark realities of medieval life and death. Through all these layers, strategy, weapon mastery, environmental adaptation, psychological acuity, and disciplined training, we gain a deeper understanding of how knights truly used their weapons. They were not merely symbols of a romanticized past, but highly skilled professionals whose lives depended on the precise, informed, and versatile use of their tools. Every strike, thrust, and maneuver was informed by centuries of accumulated knowledge, making the medieval knight a fascinating study in human skill, ingenuity, and resilience. And this perspective helps us appreciate that the romanticized image of knights fighting endlessly with swords in flawless duels is only part of the story. In reality, knights were adaptive, strategic, and deeply intelligent warriors whose expertise with weapons was as much a mental discipline as a physical one, offering timeless lessons in preparation, focus, and mastery. By the time a battle reached its full intensity, the role of a knight had shifted from individual duelist to an integrated part of a complex war machine. Knights were expected to read the ebb and flow of the battlefield, anticipate enemy maneuvers, and coordinate with allies while managing the limitations and strengths of their own weapons. A mounted knight, wielding a lance, sword, or mace, had to simultaneously control a powerful warhorse, maintain balance in full armor, and observe the surrounding chaos to select the most effective tactic. Historical accounts from battles such as Poitiers and Hastings show that success depended less on sheer courage and more on the disciplined execution of techniques honed through years of training. Even small mistakes, misjudging distance, mistiming a strike, or losing formation could have catastrophic consequences for the knight and their unit. This combination of precision, strategy, and physical skill made the knight a formidable but highly disciplined force on the medieval battlefield. One of the most remarkable aspects of knightly combat was the versatility required to switch between weapons seamlessly. Longswords were ideal for close combat and could adapt to different defensive styles, while axes and maces provided the raw, concussive power needed to bypass heavy armor. Lances were devastating in coordinated cavalry charges, but were less useful once the melee descended into a chaotic scrum. The ability to transition between these tools under extreme pressure required not only physical conditioning but also deep tactical understanding. Training manuals of the period, such as those by Johannes Liechtenauer, highlight drills for both mounted and dismounted combat, ensuring that a knight could fight effectively regardless of their position on the battlefield. This adaptability, rather than any single weapon, defined the knight's effectiveness and reputation. Shields also played a critical and often underappreciated role. While typically viewed as defensive implements, they were used offensively to push, bash, or unbalance opponents, creating openings for sword or mace strikes. The angle and positioning of a shield could make the difference between life and death, particularly when facing coordinated attacks from multiple enemies. In formations, shields could be used to protect fellow knights or infantry, highlighting the importance of teamwork and spatial awareness in addition to individual skill. Chronicles from the period often emphasize how disciplined use of shields contributed to the cohesion and effectiveness of a knightly unit, reinforcing that weapon mastery extended beyond solo combat. The psychological impact of weapon proficiency was another decisive factor. A knight approaching in full armor with a raised lance could intimidate enemies before contact, creating fear and hesitation that could be exploited strategically. Historical sources describe instances where the mere sight and sound of armored cavalry disrupted enemy formations, demonstrating that weapon use extended beyond physical effectiveness to include psychological warfare, feints, deceptive attacks, and sudden shifts in position were employed deliberately to confuse and unnerve opponents, showing that knights combined physical skill with mental tactics to dominate the battlefield. Environmental factors further shaped the deployment of weapons. Knights had to adapt to muddy fields, uneven terrain, forests, and narrow passes, often abandoning certain weapons in favor of others to suit the conditions. Cavalry charges could lose effectiveness on soft ground, while long-range engagements could make swords and maces more practical than lances. Coordination with infantry and archers became essential, as terrain could create choke points or limit movement. These adaptations reveal the knight as not merely a solitary hero, but a sophisticated strategist capable of integrating weapon use with environmental awareness and team coordination. Close-quarter combat introduced additional challenges. Grappling, throwing, and joint manipulation were critical skills, particularly when enemies closed in on mounted knights, or when the battlefield became densely packed. Techniques described in medieval martial treatises emphasized leverage, timing, and the use of an opponent's momentum against them. Knights were trained to exploit gaps in armor, target vulnerable joints, and maintain composure even under extreme duress. This aspect of fighting highlights the intelligence and adaptability required for survival, contradicting the myth of knights as purely brute force warriors. Armor itself influenced weapon choice and technique. Plate armor offered significant protection but limited mobility, requiring knights to adjust strikes and movements accordingly. Warhammers and maces were especially effective against armored foes, as they could deliver concussive force without needing to pierce the armor. Conversely, lighter weapons like swords were reserved for precision strikes at exposed areas. Historical accounts note that knights were aware of the limitations imposed by their own armor and used them to their advantage, leveraging weight and articulation for defensive and offensive maneuvers. This dynamic interplay between weapon and armor created a constant evolution of tactics, making the knight a highly adaptable and intelligent combatant. Communication and coordination were equally essential. Knights relied on hand signals, horns, banners, and pre-arranged maneuvers to maintain formation and respond to changes on the battlefield. Mounted charges required precise timing and spacing to avoid collisions and maximize impact, while dismounted knights had to maintain cohesion with infantry and ranged units. This integration of strategy, weapon mastery, and communication underscores the complexity of medieval warfare, challenging the notion of knights as solitary figures and highlighting their role within a broader, coordinated military system. Training regimes reinforced both physical and tactical proficiency. Knights began as pages and squires, gradually learning weapons, horsemanship, and battlefield strategy. Sparring, jousting, and simulated combat prepared them for the unpredictability of real battles. Continuous practice in full armor ensured that movements became instinctive, allowing knights to execute complex maneuvers even under stress. This relentless training cultivated not just skill but mental resilience, enabling knights to make rapid decisions in life-or-death situations. Finally, ethical considerations often guided weapon use alongside practicality. The chivalric code emphasized honor and discipline, but real battlefield decisions were driven by survival and tactical necessity. Knights balanced ideals of courage with pragmatic approaches to combat, using every tool and strategy available to achieve victory while adhering to personal and social codes. This combination of ethics, skill, and intelligence adds depth to our understanding of how knights wielded their weapons, revealing them as multifaceted warriors who were as strategic as they were courageous. The study of knightly weapon use offers a rich window into medieval warfare. Knights were not only highly trained fighters, but strategic thinkers who mastered a variety of weapons, adapted to dynamic environments, and exploited both physical and psychological advantages. Their legacy persists as a testament to human skill, discipline, and ingenuity, reminding us that the romanticized images of knights tell only part of the story. The rest lies in the precision, strategy, and intelligence behind every swing, thrust, and charge. As battles wore on, fatigue and endurance became as critical as skill and weapon mastery. Knights, clad in heavy armor and engaged in continuous combat, faced extreme physical strain, yet they had to maintain precision with every weapon in their arsenal. Historical records indicate that a knight's success often depended on their ability to manage energy, pace themselves, and capitalize on moments when opponents were exhausted or overextended. Even seemingly simple tasks, lifting a lance, swinging a sword, or maneuvering a warhorse through mud required careful coordination and sustained strength. This blend of physical stamina, technical proficiency, and battlefield awareness highlights the rigorous demands placed on knights and challenges the cinematic portrayal of endless, effortless duels. One aspect of combat often overlooked is the importance of tactical positioning. Knights were trained to control the flow of engagements, using their weapons not only for direct attacks but also to shape enemy movement. Cavalry charges could channel opponents into narrow corridors where infantry and archers awaited, while flanking maneuvers exploited gaps in defensive lines. The lance, in particular, was not merely a thrusting weapon, but a strategic instrument to break formations and create openings for allies. Historical examples, such as the Battle of Poitiers, demonstrate how disciplined application of weapon techniques could decisively influence outcomes, emphasizing that medieval warfare was as much about planning as execution. Close-quarters combat demanded a wide repertoire of techniques. Swords, axes, and maces were complemented by wrestling, tripping, and disarming moves, creating a multi-dimensional approach to fighting. Manuals from Fiore, Liberi, and other fencing masters detail precise sequences for half-swording, grappling, and joint manipulation, revealing a sophisticated martial science behind what modern audiences might perceive as chaotic melee. Knights were trained to anticipate opponents' actions, exploiting openings with surgical precision rather than relying on brute force alone. Each strike, parry, or throw was the culmination of years of disciplined practice and strategic thinking. Shields, often underestimated in popular imagination, were indispensable in both offense and defense. Beyond deflecting strikes, they could be used to bash opponents, break through lines, and protect allies. Formation fighting frequently relied on shield tactics, where knights maintained cohesion to resist overwhelming numbers or create opportunities for counterattacks. Detailed accounts of battles illustrate how disciplined shield use amplified the effectiveness of weaponry. demonstrating that combat success was intertwined with both individual skill and cooperative strategy. Environmental awareness remained a critical component of weapon use. Knights adapted techniques to suit terrain, weather, and battlefield obstacles. A lance charge on soft, uneven ground required adjustments to balance and timing, while dense forests or narrow passes often necessitated the use of shorter weapons like swords or axes. Integration with infantry, archers, and other cavalry units was essential, as the landscape could dictate positioning, engagement angles, and tactical options. This adaptability underscores that weapon mastery was inseparable from strategic thinking and situational awareness. The psychological dimension of combat was equally significant. Knights had to maintain composure under extreme stress, anticipate enemy moves, and exploit fear and hesitation. Feints, sudden retreats, and deceptive maneuvers were deliberately used to manipulate opponents, showing that effective weapon use extended beyond physical skill into the realm of psychological warfare. The presence of heavily armored knights, banners unfurled, and weapons at the ready often intimidated less disciplined troops, creating openings before a single sword or lance was even swung. Understanding these psychological dynamics was integral to maximizing the impact of weapon techniques. Armor influenced weapon selection and fighting style. Heavy plate provided excellent protection but required energy-efficient techniques and careful targeting. Maces and warhammers were effective against armored foes because they delivered concussive force without needing to penetrate metal. Swords were reserved for exploiting gaps in armor, demanding precision and timing. Historical accounts suggest that knights were acutely aware of their own limitations and the capabilities of their weapons, using both strategically to enhance survival and combat efficiency. The interplay between weapon, armor, and technique illustrates the complex decision-making behind every battlefield maneuver. Communication and coordination played a vital role in effective weapon deployment. Knights relied on signals, banners, horns, and prearranged strategies to maintain formation and respond to sudden shifts in the battlefield. Mounted charges required precise timing, spacing, and synchronization with fellow cavalry and infantry. Dismounted knights had to maintain cohesion while navigating chaotic melee, ensuring that weapon use was both effective and cooperative. This integration of strategy, coordination, and tactical weapon application highlights the sophistication of medieval warfare and challenges. The notion of knights as solitary heroes. Training was relentless and continuous. From early education as pages and squires to participation in tournaments and battlefield drills, knights honed skills in swordsmanship, mounted combat, and grappling. Sparring under realistic conditions in full armor prepared them for the unpredictability of real engagements. Continuous practice ensured that movements became instinctive, allowing knights to execute complex maneuvers under stress. Beyond physical skill, this training reinforced mental discipline, strategic thinking, and the capacity to respond dynamically to ever-changing combat scenarios. Finally, knights' approach to combat balanced honor, ethics, and pragmatism. While the chivalric code emphasized courage, loyalty, and discipline, practical survival dictated effective weapon use. Every decision, whether striking with a sword, swinging a mace, or positioning a lance, was influenced by tactical necessity, ethical considerations, and situational awareness. This duality highlights the multidimensional nature of knightly warfare, blending the ideals of chivalry with the harsh realities of life and death. on the battlefield. By examining these aspects, the adaptability of weapon techniques, strategic positioning, teamwork, and the psychological and ethical dimensions of combat, we gain a profound understanding of how knights truly wielded their weapons. They were not merely symbols of chivalry, but highly skilled, intelligent warriors whose effectiveness depended on a delicate balance of skill, strategy, and mental acuity. Their legacy continues to fascinate, revealing a rich and nuanced history that goes far beyond romanticized images of heroic duels. As battles extended over hours or even days, endurance and adaptability became defining traits of successful knights. The physical demands of wearing heavy armor, controlling a powerful warhorse, and repeatedly wielding weapons in high-stress conditions required extraordinary stamina. Knights had to pace themselves, manage fatigue, and conserve energy while still executing precise attacks with swords, lances, maces, and axes. Contemporary accounts emphasize that exhaustion could turn a skilled warrior into an easy target, making physical conditioning as vital as weapon mastery. Yet, the ability to maintain composure, observe enemy movements, and anticipate threats, even when drained, separated seasoned knights from inexperienced fighters, demonstrating the blend of mental resilience and physical skill necessary to survive medieval combat. Weapon versatility was central to a knight's effectiveness. Longswords allowed for slashing, thrusting, and defensive techniques, adaptable to both mounted and foot combat. Axes, maces, and warhammers provided powerful, targeted strikes capable of penetrating or incapacitating armored opponents. Lances were optimized for coordinated cavalry charges, breaking enemy formations and creating openings for follow-up attacks. Historical treatises, including those by Fiore de Liberi and Johannes Liechtenauer, outline detailed techniques for transitioning seamlessly between these weapons depending on battlefield circumstances. This fluidity ensured that knights could respond to evolving threats, demonstrating that mastery of multiple weapons was as much a tactical necessity as a display of martial skill. Close-quarters combat introduced a mix of grappling, throwing, and targeted strikes. Knights trained in techniques that exploited gaps in armor, leveraged opponents' momentum, and maintained control in chaotic scrums. Manuals describe half-swording and wrestling moves in full armor, emphasizing precision over brute force. Each maneuver required split-second decision-making, a keen understanding of human anatomy, and the ability to adapt under extreme pressure. Far from the simplified, cinematic portrayals, these encounters were intricate contests of strength, timing, and intelligence, highlighting the multi-dimensional expertise of the medieval knight. Shields were equally critical in shaping combat dynamics. Beyond their defensive purpose, they could be used offensively to bash, unbalance, or create tactical openings. Different shield types, kite, heater, round offered distinct advantages, and disciplined coordination among units amplified their effectiveness. Historical examples show how shields could protect allies, reinforce formations, and disrupt enemy attacks, demonstrating that knights' effectiveness relied not only on individual skill, but also on teamwork and situational awareness. Shield use intertwined defense with offense, making it an integral part of medieval strategy rather than merely a protective accessory. Psychological factors significantly influenced weapon deployment. Knights had to manage fear, maintain focus, and exploit hesitation or panic in opponents. Feints, deceptive attacks, and sudden shifts in movement were used strategically, to unsettle enemies. The imposing appearance of armored knights, combined with the sound of clashing weapons and charging horses, could intimidate opposing forces, often turning psychological pressure into a decisive advantage. Effective weapon use, therefore, encompassed not only the physical execution of strikes, but also the manipulation of perception and morale on the battlefield. Terrain and environment shaped how weapons were employed. Mud, hills, forests, and narrow passes could limit movement, force tactical adjustments, and dictate the choice of weapons. Cavalry charges were less effective in soft or uneven ground, prompting the use of swords, axes, or maces for close combat. Coordinating with infantry and ranged units became essential, allowing knights to exploit terrain advantages and maintain battlefield control. Historical records underscore that understanding and adapting to environmental conditions was as crucial to weapon effectiveness as technique or training, highlighting the multidimensional challenges faced by medieval warriors. Armor dictated both protection and limitations. Plate armor provided defense against many weapon strikes but restricted mobility, demanding precision and energy-efficient techniques. Maces and warhammers were particularly effective against heavily armored foes, delivering concussive force without relying on penetration. Swords were reserved for exploiting gaps in armor. Knights understood the interplay between their own protection, weapon selection, and offensive strategy, leveraging both armor and weapons to maximize survivability and combat effectiveness. This dynamic relationship illustrates the depth of strategic thinking required for medieval combat. Communication and coordination reinforced weapon effectiveness. Knights relied on horns, banners, and prearranged signals to synchronize charges, maintain formation, and respond to unexpected changes. Mounted units required precise spacing and timing to avoid collisions, while dismounted knights coordinated with infantry and ranged units to maintain cohesion. The combination of strategic planning, tactical awareness, and disciplined execution ensured that weapon use was maximized within a larger military framework. Medieval combat was thus a complex system of interdependent skills, strategy, and coordination rather than a series of isolated duels. Training regimes cultivated both technical skill and mental acuity. From early instruction as pages and squires to tournament and battlefield practice, knights honed their proficiency in a variety of weapons under realistic conditions. Sparring, mounted drills, and full armor simulations instilled instinctive reactions, allowing rapid adaptation to dynamic combat scenarios. Mental discipline was reinforced through repeated exposure to high-stress situations, preparing knights to make swift, informed decisions in life-or-death encounters. This combination of physical conditioning, skill, and mental fortitude was essential to their effectiveness and survival on the battlefield. Finally, knights balanced ideals of chivalry with pragmatic combat strategy, while the code of conduct emphasized honor, courage, and loyalty. Survival and battlefield success required practical, effective weapon use. Every decision, whether swinging a sword, thrusting a lance, or striking with a mace, was informed by strategy, ethics, and situational awareness. This duality highlights the multidimensional nature of knightly warfare, blending the romance of chivalry with the practical realities of medieval combat. By examining endurance, weapon versatility, close combat techniques, psychological factors, environmental adaptation, and ethical considerations, we gain a comprehensive understanding of how knights truly used their weapons. They were not merely icons of medieval legend, but highly trained, intelligent warriors whose effectiveness depended on skill, strategy, and mental resilience. Every strike, thrust, and maneuver reflected years of disciplined practice and strategic insight, making the study of their combat techniques endlessly compelling. As the battle progressed into extended engagements, knights relied not just on raw strength, but on adaptability, foresight, and acute battlefield awareness. Fatigue became a major factor, both physical and mental, and even the most experienced warriors had to manage energy carefully while maintaining precision in their attacks. Historical chronicles highlight that prolonged exposure to combat often caused lapses in judgment or slowed reaction times, which could be fatal. Knights were trained to pace themselves, alternating between aggressive maneuvers and calculated defense, ensuring that their weapons remained effective throughout the fight. The combination of endurance, strategy, and skill under pressure distinguished elite knights from less disciplined soldiers and defined their reputation as formidable combatants. The mastery of multiple weapons was essential, while the longsword was celebrated for its versatility. Capable of both slashing and thrusting, it often needed to be paired with other tools. Axes, maces, and warhammers were crucial for delivering concussive force to armored opponents, while lances provided devastating impact during cavalry charges. Manuals from the period emphasize the importance of transitioning seamlessly between weapons, with knights adjusting tactics in response to enemy behavior, terrain, and fatigue. This dynamic approach ensured that a knight's arsenal was not static but responsive, reflecting a blend of technical skill and strategic acumen. Close quarters combat presented a unique set of challenges. Grappling, tripping, and targeted strikes to armor gaps demanded not just strength, but precise timing and spatial awareness. The half-sword technique, combined with wrestling maneuvers, allowed knights to exploit vulnerabilities even in heavily armored opponents. Every move required mental acuity, rapid judgment, and the ability to read an opponent's intentions. These encounters reveal the sophisticated martial knowledge that medieval knights possessed, highlighting that effective weapon use was far more than brute force. It was a calculated interplay of skill, observation, and instinct, honed over years of rigorous training. Shields were multifunctional tools, extending beyond simple defense. They could be used offensively to push enemies, disrupt formations, or create openings for follow-up attacks. The type of shield, whether kite, heater, or round, dictated specific tactical applications. Historical accounts describe coordinated shield maneuvers in formations, illustrating that teamwork and spatial awareness were integral to maximizing the effectiveness of weapons. Shields allowed knights to manipulate engagements, protect allies, and exploit enemy weaknesses, emphasizing that strategic weapon use was inseparable from collaboration and situational awareness. Psychology played a critical role in combat. Knights understood that fear and hesitation could be as decisive as the effectiveness of a weapon. Feints, deceptive attacks, and sudden shifts in position were used deliberately to unsettle opponents, while the imposing presence of armored knights often intimidated enemy forces before a strike was made. Accounts from chroniclers show that psychological tactics combined with precise physical strikes were used to disrupt formations, creating openings that could turn the tide of battle. This illustrates that medieval weapon use encompassed not only mechanics but also manipulation of perception and morale. Environmental conditions further dictated weapon choice and tactics. Uneven terrain, mud, forests, and narrow passes required knights to adjust strategies, selecting weapons best suited to immediate circumstances. Cavalry charges lost efficiency on soft ground, making close combat weapons like swords and axes more practical. Collaboration with infantry and archers became critical, as environmental factors could create choke points or disrupt formations. Historical evidence shows that effective knights were constantly reading the battlefield, adapting to terrain, and deploying weapons strategically to exploit every advantage, demonstrating that weapon mastery was deeply integrated with situational awareness. Armor influenced both offensive and defensive strategies. Plate armor provided substantial protection, but required careful, energy-efficient movements. Maces and warhammers delivered the concussive power necessary to incapacitate armored foes, while swords targeted vulnerable gaps. Knights were acutely aware of their own limitations, using armor to enhance defense while relying on precise strikes to maximize offensive effectiveness. The relationship between armor and weapon selection underscores the sophistication of medieval combat, where every decision reflected careful assessment and tactical reasoning. Communication and coordination amplified weapon effectiveness. Knights used horns, banners, hand signals, and pre-planned maneuvers to maintain formation and respond to unexpected changes. Mounted charges required precise timing and spacing, while dismounted knights coordinated with infantry and archers to ensure unified action. The integration of communication, strategy, and tactical execution made medieval warfare a complex system of interdependent skills, demonstrating that weapon mastery was inseparable from teamwork and planning. Training regimes reinforced these capabilities. From the earliest years as pages and squires, knights practiced horsemanship, weapon techniques, and combat strategy. Simulated battles, tournaments, and sparring sessions honed instinctive responses, allowing warriors to perform under stress. Mental discipline, endurance, and tactical thinking were cultivated alongside technical skill, preparing knights for the unpredictable dynamics of real combat. Continuous practice ensured adaptability, precision, and the ability to exploit fleeting opportunities, essential qualities for survival and success. Finally, ethical considerations and pragmatism shaped combat behavior. While the chivalric code emphasized courage, honor, and loyalty, practical survival often dictated the optimal use of weapons. Knights balanced ideals of valor with tactical necessity, blending ethical frameworks with effectiveness. Every choice, whether a swing of the sword, a thrust of the lance, or a defensive maneuver with a shield, was informed by a combination of training, judgment, and moral reasoning. This balance of ethics, skill, and strategy illustrates the multifaceted nature of knightly warfare. Examining endurance, weapon versatility, close combat skill, psychological insight, environmental adaptation, and ethical decision-making provides a comprehensive picture of how knights truly wielded their weapons. They were not simply legendary figures, but highly trained, intelligent, and adaptable warriors whose effectiveness depended on the careful integration of skill, strategy, and mental resilience. Every movement, strike, and maneuver reflected decades of disciplined practice, tactical insight, and battlefield experience, making the study of knightly combat endlessly fascinating. As battles intensified, knights had to constantly adjust to the unpredictable dynamics of warfare, blending skill, strategy, and sheer physical endurance. No longer was combat a simple clash of individuals. It was a fluid, chaotic environment where split-second decisions determined life or death. Fatigue, both mental and physical, played a crucial role. Even a seasoned knight, expertly trained and armored, could falter under the strain of repeated strikes, hours of standing, or managing a panicked horse. Historical accounts often mention that successful knights were not just strong, but exceptionally disciplined, able to conserve energy, remain alert, and execute precise attacks despite exhaustion. Their effectiveness was a product of meticulous training, situational awareness, and adaptability under relentless pressure. Weapon mastery extended beyond brute force. The longsword, central to a knight's arsenal, was a tool of precision, allowing for slashing, thrusting, and intricate parries. Techniques like half-swording enabled attacks at close range or against armored foes, demonstrating that skill often outweighed raw power. Axes, maces, and warhammers complemented swords, delivering crushing blows capable of incapacitating opponents clad in plate armor. Lances, iconic for mounted charges, required coordination, speed, and timing. Cavalry formations could break enemy lines, create chaos, and provide strategic advantage, but only if wielded correctly. Training manuals from the period, including those by Johannes Liechtenauer, detail how knights practiced fluid transitions between weapons, emphasizing adaptability and tactical awareness in real combat scenarios. Close quarters combat demanded even more versatility. Grappling, tripping, and strikes aimed at joints or exposed areas of armor required precision, observation, and rapid response. Medieval treatises reveal that knights practiced intricate sequences designed to turn an opponent's strength against them. Far from uncontrolled brawls, these engagements were calculated contests where intelligence and technique were as critical as strength. The ability to execute these techniques instinctively, while under pressure, separated elite knights from the untrained and ensured survival in the most chaotic moments of battle. Shields were far more than defensive tools. They were integral to offense and formation strategy. Bashes could unbalance foes, create openings, and protect allies. Different shield types allowed for specific tactical applications, from reinforcing infantry lines to supporting mounted maneuvers. Coordinated use of shields in formation enhanced the effectiveness of individual weapon strikes, demonstrating that teamwork was essential. Medieval chronicles highlight numerous instances where disciplined shield tactics prevented breakthroughs, showing that combat effectiveness relied not only on skill with a weapon, but also on coordination, spatial awareness, and communication within units. Psychological factors influenced combat outcomes significantly. Knights leveraged intimidation, feints, and deceptive maneuvers to unsettle enemies. The visual impact of armor, banners, and charging horses could cause hesitation or fear before physical contact. Historical accounts describe how psychological pressure could amplify the effectiveness of weapon use, with opponents faltering under combined physical and mental assault. Knights understood that the mind could be as vulnerable as the body, and weapon deployment often included strategies to exploit this advantage, creating opportunities for decisive strikes. Environmental adaptation was another critical element. Terrain, weather, and obstacles dictated weapon choice and tactical approach. Cavalry charges lost effectiveness on soft, uneven ground, while forests and narrow passes favored shorter, more versatile weapons. Knights coordinated closely with infantry and ranged units to navigate terrain effectively, using obstacles to their advantage. Historical evidence demonstrates that strategic adaptation to environmental conditions was essential, requiring not only technical skill but also tactical foresight and situational awareness. Armor influenced both offensive and defensive strategies. Plate armor offered protection but limited agility, demanding precise movements and energy-efficient techniques. Maces and warhammers were effective in overcoming armored opponents, while swords targeted gaps. Knights combined knowledge of their own limitations with tactical awareness, maximizing the synergy between armor and weapons. This interplay of protection and offensive capability highlights the strategic sophistication behind seemingly simple combat gestures. Communication and unit coordination amplified weapon effectiveness. Knights relied on horns, banners, hand signals, and prearranged strategies to maintain cohesion. Mounted units executed coordinated charges with precise spacing, while dismounted knights synchronized with infantry and archers to control the battlefield. This integration of communication, tactical execution, and weapon mastery underscores that medieval combat was a highly organized system rather than a series of isolated duels, demonstrating the combination of individual skill and collective strategy that defined knightly warfare. Training reinforced every aspect of combat readiness. From early life as pages and squires, knights practiced weapons, horsemanship, and battlefield strategy. Sparring in full armor, simulated battles, and tournament experiences honed instinctive responses. Continuous practice ensured adaptability under stress, precision in execution, and mental fortitude. Knights were prepared for unpredictable combat scenarios, where the ability to respond quickly and intelligently often determined survival. Their lifelong dedication to mastering weapons and tactics made them not just warriors, but disciplined strategists, capable of navigating chaos with skill and composure. Ethics and pragmatism intersected in combat decisions. While the chivalric code promoted courage, loyalty, and honor, real-world survival demanded effective weapon use. Knights balanced ethical considerations with tactical efficiency, making calculated decisions with both morality and practicality in mind. Every action, from a sword strike to a defensive maneuver, reflected careful judgment informed by training, experience, and situational awareness, highlighting the multidimensional nature of knightly warfare. By examining endurance, adaptability, psychological insight, environmental awareness, and ethical decision-making, we gain a deeper understanding of how knights truly wielded their weapons. They were highly skilled, intelligent, and adaptable warriors whose mastery extended beyond physical technique to encompass strategy, teamwork, and mental resilience. Every movement, thrust, and strike reflected decades of preparation, careful planning, and tactical sophistication, making the study of knightly combat a compelling window into the realities of medieval warfare. As battles reached their most intense moments, knights had to manage not only their weapons but the chaos surrounding them. Unlike the romanticized images of one-on-one duels, real combat was messy, fluid, and unpredictable. Knights had to read constantly shifting situations, anticipate attacks from multiple directions, and respond with both precision and speed. Fatigue, injuries, and psychological stress could all compromise effectiveness. So stamina, focus, and adaptability were as vital as weapon skill. Chronicles of battles such as Agincourt and Bannockburn highlight that even the most skilled knights relied heavily on discipline, timing, and coordination to survive the relentless pressures of prolonged combat. Each decision when to strike, parry, or reposition could determine not only personal survival, but the outcome of entire engagements. Weapon versatility remained central to battlefield success. The longsword, celebrated for its flexibility, allowed for slashing, thrusting, and defensive maneuvers in both mounted and dismounted scenarios. Axes, maces, and warhammers provided the concentrated force needed to penetrate armor or disable opponents effectively. Lances delivered maximum impact during mounted charges, breaking formations and creating opportunities for infantry to exploit. Manuals like those from Johannes Liechtenauer describe methods for switching between these weapons seamlessly, reflecting a practical, adaptable approach to combat that went far beyond cinematic spectacle. This continuous adaptability was key to responding to evolving threats and exploiting fleeting openings. Close quarters engagements demanded extraordinary skill and mental acuity. Knights grappled, tripped, and targeted weak points in armor, employing techniques that required precise timing and awareness of an opponent's strength and position. Historical treatises detail methods like half-swording, joint manipulation, and leverage-based throws, demonstrating that combat was as much intellectual as it was physical. Success relied on anticipation, observation, and instinct honed over years of training. Even a single misjudged move in a crowded melee could prove fatal, underscoring the critical integration of skill, awareness, and timing in knightly weapon use. Shields were far more than defensive implements. They were multifunctional tools, central to both offense and formation tactics. A well-timed shield bash could unbalance opponents, create openings for follow-up attacks, or protect allies within a formation. Different shield types, keter, and round offered strategic advantages depending on position and battlefield conditions. Records show coordinated shield use among knights and infantry, emphasizing that effective weapon deployment relied on teamwork, spatial awareness, and strategic planning. The shield, combined with offensive weapons, allowed knights to manipulate engagements, control momentum, and protect vulnerable flanks, demonstrating the sophistication of medieval battlefield strategy. Psychological warfare played a pivotal role in combat effectiveness. Knights used intimidation, feints, and unexpected maneuvers to disrupt enemy focus. The visual impact of full armor, the thunder of charging horses, and the clash of weapons often induced fear and hesitation, giving knights a tactical advantage even before physical engagement. Psychological manipulation complemented physical weapon use, turning perception into a weapon itself. Medieval accounts frequently highlight the effect of such tactics on opposing forces, illustrating that weapon mastery was intertwined with psychological insight and battlefield intelligence. Terrain and environmental conditions significantly influenced combat decisions. Uneven ground, mud, forests, and narrow passes dictated movement, weapon choice, and strategy. Cavalry charges could be nullified by soft terrain, requiring knights to switch to close combat weapons like swords, axes, or maces. Coordination with infantry and archers was essential, as terrain often dictated where and how forces could maneuver effectively. Successful knights demonstrated acute situational awareness, leveraging terrain to maximize the impact of their weapons and maintain tactical superiority despite environmental challenges. Armor shaped both defensive and offensive strategies. Plate armor provided substantial protection but limited agility, necessitating precise, energy-efficient strikes and movements. Maces and warhammers were ideal for delivering concussive blows to armored opponents, while swords exploited exposed gaps. Knights were keenly aware of these dynamics, using both armor and weapons strategically to maintain survivability and maximize offensive potential. The interplay between protection and weapon application highlights the tactical sophistication and disciplined decision-making underlying knightly combat. Communication and coordination were essential to maximize weapon effectiveness. Horns, banners, hand signals, and pre-arranged strategies ensured that mounted units maintained spacing and cohesion, while dismounted knights synchronized with infantry and ranged units. This integration of strategic planning, tactical execution, and weapon mastery reinforced the collaborative nature of medieval warfare. Effective combat depended as much on coordination and collective action as on individual skill, demonstrating that knights were highly trained, adaptive, and disciplined members of a complex military system. Training emphasized both technical proficiency and mental fortitude. From early years as pages and squires, knights engaged in rigorous exercises in weapon use, horsemanship, and battlefield strategy. Sparring, tournaments, and full-armor drills developed instinctive responses under pressure, while continuous practice reinforced mental resilience and adaptability. Knights became capable of rapid, precise decision-making, adjusting to changing circumstances while maintaining composure and accuracy. Their lifelong dedication to mastering weapons, strategy, and discipline made them elite warriors who thrived in chaos and uncertainty. Finally, knights balanced chivalric ideals with practical combat strategy. While honor, loyalty, and courage were emphasized, battlefield survival demanded effective, efficient use of weapons. Every strike, thrust, or defensive maneuver reflected a combination of training, judgment, and situational awareness. Knights embodied a blend of ethical principles and pragmatic skill, revealing the multi-dimensional nature of medieval warfare. The study of their weapon use provides a nuanced understanding of how preparation, strategy, and mental resilience combined to create formidable warriors. By examining endurance, adaptability, close combat skill, psychological insight, environmental awareness, and ethical decision-making, we gain a comprehensive view of how knights truly used their weapons. They were not mere symbols of legend, but highly skilled, intelligent, and strategic warriors whose expertise encompassed precision, strategy, and mental acuity. Every maneuver, strike, and counterstrike reflected years of disciplined practice, tactical foresight, and battlefield experience, offering a fascinating lens into the reality behind the myths of medieval knighthood. As the intensity of battle deepened, knights had to rely on more than just individual skill. They needed acute awareness of the broader battlefield and the movements of both allies and enemies. Knights were trained to anticipate attacks from multiple directions, coordinate with fellow warriors, and adapt their weapon use to shifting scenarios. Fatigue became a critical factor. Swinging a sword, thrusting a lance, or grappling in full armor required immense stamina. Historical accounts from battles such as Crécy and Poitiers reveal that even the most elite knights could falter under sustained exertion, emphasizing that endurance and strategic energy management were as vital as technical prowess. Every swing or thrust needed to be deliberate, conserving energy while maintaining maximum effectiveness in the heat of combat. Weapon versatility was essential for survival. The longsword allowed knights to engage opponents in both mounted and foot combat, performing slashes, thrusts, and defensive parries with precision. Axes, maces, and warhammers delivered the force necessary to penetrate armor or incapacitate heavily equipped foes, while lances were devastating in coordinated cavalry charges that aimed to disrupt enemy formations. Period training manuals, including those of Johannes Liechtenauer, emphasize the importance of transitioning seamlessly between weapons, showing that successful knights were not one-dimensional fighters but adaptable strategists who adjusted their approach based on the conditions of battle. Close quarters combat demanded extraordinary skill and mental acuity. Techniques such as half-swording, grappling, and joint manipulation allowed knights to exploit vulnerabilities in armor and leverage opponents' momentum against them. Far from being chaotic brawls, these engagements were highly structured, requiring anticipation, observation, and split-second decision-making. Knights trained extensively to perform these maneuvers instinctively, ensuring survival even in the most crowded and unpredictable melee. This combination of mental agility and physical expertise was a hallmark of effective knightly combat. Shields played a multifunctional role in warfare, offering both defense and offense. They could be used to block strikes, bash opponents, unbalance enemies, or create openings for follow-up attacks. Different shield designs, kite, heater, round, provided unique advantages depending on position and combat scenario. Historical sources describe coordinated shield tactics within formations, demonstrating that teamwork and spatial awareness amplified weapon effectiveness. The combination of offensive and defensive use of shields highlights the integrated, strategic approach knights took in managing both their weapons and the battlefield environment. Psychological elements were critical in influencing outcomes. Knights employed intimidation, feints, and deceptive maneuvers to disrupt enemy focus and morale. The sight of armored cavalry, banners waving, and the sound of charging horses could cause hesitation or panic in opponents. Psychological pressure often amplified the impact of weapon strikes, turning perception into a tactical advantage. Chroniclers frequently highlight instances where such tactics decisively shifted the momentum of battle, showing that effective weapon use encompassed not just mechanics, but also the manipulation of enemy behavior and expectations. Environmental conditions significantly affected tactical choices and weapon deployment. Uneven terrain, mud, forested areas, and narrow passes influenced both movement and weapon selection. Cavalry charges could be rendered ineffective by soft or sloped ground, prompting reliance on swords, axes, or maces for close combat. Coordination with infantry and archers became critical, as environmental obstacles could dictate where knights could maneuver and how effectively they could engage the enemy. Skilled knights adapted their weapon techniques to the environment, leveraging terrain advantages while mitigating vulnerabilities. Armor also dictated how knights employed their weapons. While plate armor offered significant protection, it limited mobility, requiring precise, energy-efficient techniques. Maces and warhammers delivered concussive power against armored foes, while swords targeted gaps and joints. Historical accounts demonstrate that knights were acutely aware of the interplay between their protection and offensive capacity, using both strategically to maximize effectiveness. This combination of tactical reasoning and weapon skill illustrates the sophisticated decision-making inherent in knightly combat. Communication and coordination were indispensable for maximizing weapon effectiveness. Horns, banners, hand signals, and prearranged strategies ensured that units maintained formation and timing. Mounted charges required exact spacing, while dismounted knights coordinated with infantry and archers to control key points on the battlefield. This fusion of communication, strategy, and execution reveals that effective medieval combat relied equally on collaboration as on individual weapon proficiency, highlighting the complex, interdependent nature of knightly warfare. Training reinforced all these capabilities, from early education as pages and squires to tournaments and battlefield drills. Knights developed both technical skill and mental resilience. Sparring in full armor, simulated engagements, and repetitive practice, instinctive responses, allowing knights to perform with precision under extreme stress. Mental discipline, endurance, and strategic thinking were cultivated alongside weapon mastery, preparing knights to respond quickly and effectively in rapidly changing combat situations. Their rigorous preparation made them elite warriors, capable of executing complex maneuvers while maintaining focus and composure. Finally, knights balanced the ideals of chivalry with practical combat demands. The code emphasized honor, courage, and loyalty, yet survival required effective and strategic use of weapons. Every swing, thrust, or defensive action reflected a combination of ethics, skill, and tactical awareness. This blend of ethical consideration and pragmatic combat strategy underscores the multidimensional nature of medieval knighthood. Studying how knights used their weapons provides a deep understanding of their skill, intelligence, and the strategic sophistication that defined their effectiveness in battle. As battles dragged on, the interplay between endurance, strategy, and weapon mastery became increasingly critical for knights. Extended combat tested not only strength and stamina, but also mental resilience and tactical awareness. Even seasoned knights could be overwhelmed by fatigue, heat from armor, or the unpredictability of chaotic skirmishes. Historical records from conflicts like the Battle of Hastings and the 100 Years' War emphasized that survival depended on pacing oneself, conserving energy, and choosing moments to strike or defend with precision. Every swing, thrust, or parry had to be deliberate, balancing effort and effectiveness, as a single miscalculation could have fatal consequences for the knight and his unit. Versatility with weapons was key. The longsword offered flexibility for both mounted and dismounted fighting, enabling slashes, thrusts, and parries, while axes, maces, and warhammers delivered the concussive power necessary against heavily armored foes. Lances were devastating during coordinated cavalry charges, capable of breaking enemy lines and opening paths for allied infantry. Training manuals from the medieval period, such as those by Fiore de Liberi, detailed fluid techniques for switching between weapons, depending on terrain, fatigue, and the opponent's stance. This adaptability allowed knights to respond dynamically to changing battlefield conditions, demonstrating that medieval combat required far more than raw power. It demanded strategic decision-making and technical precision. Close combat encounters highlighted the complexity of knightly training. Grappling, tripping, and precise strikes at joints or gaps in armor required not only physical strength but acute situational awareness and mental agility. Techniques like half-swording or using the crossguard to control an opponent were practiced to instinctive perfection, allowing knights to survive even the most chaotic melees. Far from the cinematic depictions of wild, indiscriminate fighting, medieval hand-to-hand combat was a disciplined, highly calculated interaction where every move could mean the difference between life and death. Shields were multifaceted tools, essential to both offense and defense. They could absorb strikes, unbalance opponents, or create openings for attacks, while also protecting allies within formations. The type of shield, kite, heater, or round determined its tactical application. Accounts from chroniclers show how coordinated shield tactics enhanced the effectiveness of weapons, demonstrating that teamwork, spatial awareness, and strategic use of tools were critical components of medieval warfare. Shields allowed knights to manipulate engagements, control momentum, and protect vulnerable positions, showing that effective combat depended on integration rather than individual action alone. Psychology was a powerful weapon in itself. Knights employed feints, deceptive movements, and sudden maneuvers to destabilize enemies, while the intimidating presence of full armor, banners, and charging horses often caused hesitation or panic. Reports suggest that psychological pressure frequently amplified the impact of physical strikes, turning perception into a tactical advantage. Medieval warfare was as much a contest of minds as bodies, with successful knights using their weapons to exploit fear, hesitation, and reaction time to gain superiority. Environmental factors dictated tactics and weapon choices. Mud, hills, forests, and narrow passes forced knights to adapt techniques and select weapons suited to immediate conditions. Cavalry charges could be compromised by soft ground, necessitating the use of close combat weapons such as swords, axes, or maces. Collaboration with infantry and archers became essential in constricted spaces or adverse conditions. Historical evidence shows that knights constantly adapted to terrain and obstacles, demonstrating that effective weapon use was inseparable from situational awareness and strategic foresight. Armor shaped both protection and offensive capability. Plate armor offered substantial defense but limited mobility, requiring precise, energy-efficient strikes. Maces and warhammers delivered concussive power, while swords targeted gaps and joints. Knights understood the interaction between protection and defense, leveraging both to maximize effectiveness. This interplay of armor and weapon usage underscores the calculated and highly strategic nature of knightly combat. Communication and coordination reinforced weapon effectiveness. Horns, banners, hand signals, and prearranged maneuvers maintained unit cohesion and timing. Mounted units executed precise charges, while dismounted knights coordinated with infantry and archers to control critical zones. This integration of tactical planning, strategic execution, and weapon skill highlights that medieval combat was a sophisticated system rather than a series of isolated duels, emphasizing the interdependence of individual skill and collective strategy. Training was relentless and multifaceted, from childhood as pages and squires to sparring in full armor and participating in tournaments. Knights developed both physical skill and mental discipline, Repetitive practice under realistic conditions instilled instinctive reactions, endurance, and the ability to make split-second decisions. Knights became highly adaptable warriors, capable of responding to unpredictable combat scenarios, blending technique, strategy, and mental fortitude seamlessly. Finally, knights balanced chivalric ideals with practical warfare, while the code of honor emphasized courage, loyalty, and integrity. Survival demanded strategic weapon use. Each strike, parry, and maneuver reflected a combination of ethical consideration, technical skill, and battlefield intelligence. This balance between principle and pragmatism underscores the multidimensional nature of knightly combat. Studying how knights employed their weapons provides insight into their skill, strategy, and resilience, revealing them as disciplined, intelligent warriors rather than mythical figures. As the chaos of prolonged combat intensified, knights had to rely on a combination of skill, tactical awareness, and mental resilience to remain effective. Unlike the simplified duels often depicted in stories, medieval battles were sprawling, unpredictable, and deadly. Knights needed to monitor multiple threats simultaneously, anticipate enemy maneuvers, and coordinate their actions with allies while managing fatigue and the weight of full armor. Historical accounts from major engagements, such as the Battle of Agincourt and the Battle of Poitiers, underscore that even highly trained knights were at constant risk of exhaustion or injury, making stamina, concentration, and deliberate action essential to their survival. Every movement, whether a swing of a sword, thrust of a lance, or strategic repositioning, was carefully calculated to maximize impact and conserve energy. Weapon versatility was crucial for a knight's survival and effectiveness. The longsword, celebrated for its adaptability, allowed slashing, thrusting, and parrying in both mounted and dismounted combat. Axes, maces, and warhammers provided the force needed to damage or incapacitate armored opponents, while lances delivered decisive impact during cavalry charges aimed at breaking enemy formations. Medieval treatises, including those by Fiore de Liberi and Johannes Liechtenauer, emphasized fluid techniques for transitioning between weapons, illustrating that adaptability and technical proficiency were paramount. Successful knights were not just strong, they were strategic thinkers who understood when and how to use each weapon to exploit openings and respond to evolving threats. Close quarters combat required extraordinary precision and situational awareness. Knights employed grappling, joint manipulation, and half-swording techniques to exploit gaps in armor or leverage an opponent's weight and momentum against them. Far from chaotic brawls, these encounters were highly tactical, demanding split-second judgment, instinctive skill, and careful observation. Historical manuals describe intricate sequences designed for full-armored engagement, revealing that intellectual and strategic preparation was as important as physical strength. A single misstep could prove fatal, highlighting the importance of disciplined training and mental acuity in real medieval combat. Shields played a multifaceted role in battle. Beyond defense, they were used to strike, unbalance, or create openings for follow-up attacks. Different shield types, such as the kite, heater, and round shield, afford tactical advantages depending on positioning and battlefield conditions. Chronicles reveal coordinated shield use within units, demonstrating that teamwork and spatial awareness amplified the effectiveness of weapons. Shields allowed knights to control engagements, protect allies, and maintain momentum. proving that combat effectiveness depended on integrating individual skill with strategic coordination. Psychological warfare was a key element of medieval fighting. Knights leveraged feints, deceptive movements, and the intimidating presence of full armor, banners, and charging horses to disrupt enemy focus. Historical records suggest that fear and hesitation among opponents often amplified the impact of weapon strikes, giving skilled knights a critical advantage. Effective combat thus blended physical prowess with psychological insight, turning perception into a tactical tool to create openings and dictate the flow of engagement. Environmental factors profoundly influenced weapon use. Terrain, weather, and obstacles dictated both movement and tactical choice. Cavalry charges could be rendered ineffective on soft ground or uneven terrain, necessitating reliance on swords, axes, or maces for close combat. Coordination with infantry and archers became essential in constrained spaces. Knights demonstrated remarkable adaptability, modifying techniques and strategies to suit forests, hills, narrow passes, or muddy conditions, highlighting that successful weapon use was inseparable from situational awareness and environmental mastery. Armor dictated not only defense but also offensive strategy. Plate armor provided substantial protection but restricted mobility, requiring precise, energy-efficient strikes and strategic targeting. Maces and warhammers delivered concussive power against armored foes, while swords exploited gaps and joints. The interplay between armor and weapons illustrates the tactical sophistication of knights, where every offensive and defensive maneuver was calculated to maximize effectiveness while minimizing risk. Communication and coordination amplified combat effectiveness. Horns, banners, hand signals, and prearranged strategies ensured unit cohesion and precise execution. Mounted knights executed coordinated charges, while dismounted fighters worked with infantry and archers to control key zones. This integration of tactical planning, real-time communication, and weapon mastery shows that medieval warfare relied on highly organized, cooperative action rather than isolated duels, emphasizing that a knight's skill was inseparable from broader military strategy. Training was relentless and lifelong. From pages and squires to tournament duels and battlefield drills, knights cultivated physical prowess, mental resilience, and strategic thinking. Repetitive practice under realistic conditions built instinctive reactions, endurance, and the ability to make split-second decisions under pressure. Knights became highly adaptable warriors, capable of responding to unpredictable combat scenarios while maintaining composure, precision, and efficiency. Their extensive preparation transformed them into elite soldiers who could thrive in the chaos of war. Finally, knights balanced the ideals of chivalry with pragmatic combat demands. Honor, loyalty, and courage were central to their identity, but survival often required calculated, efficient weapon use. Every strike, thrust, or defensive maneuver reflected a combination of ethics, technical skill, and situational awareness. This synthesis of principle and practicality demonstrates the multidimensional nature of medieval knighthood, revealing knights as disciplined, intelligent warriors rather than mere symbols of legend. As battles raged on, the demands on knights intensified, requiring them to combine physical prowess, tactical acumen, and mental resilience. Unlike cinematic depictions of clean duels, real medieval warfare was chaotic, with threats emerging from every direction. Knights had to maintain focus while managing fatigue, injuries, and the weight of armor. Historical accounts from engagements such as the Battle of Crécy and the Battle of Poitiers highlight that even the most experienced knights were vulnerable under prolonged stress, emphasizing the importance of stamina, strategy, and deliberate action. Every swing of the sword, thrust of a lance, or block with a shield had to be calculated, balancing effort with effectiveness in a constantly shifting battlefield. Weapon versatility was central to a knight's survival. The longsword allowed for slashing, thrusting, and defensive maneuvers in both mounted and dismounted combat. Axes, maces, and warhammers provided the concussive force necessary to overcome heavily armored opponents, while lances delivered devastating impact during cavalry charges designed to disrupt enemy lines. Medieval treatises, such as those by Johannes Liechtenauer and Fiore de Liberi, stress fluid transitions between weapons and techniques, highlighting that adaptability and technical mastery were as critical as strength. Successful knights could assess the situation, switch weapons seamlessly, and exploit openings with precision, demonstrating a level of skill that extended beyond brute force. Close quarters combat required extraordinary skill, timing, and awareness. Knights employed grappling, joint manipulation, and half-sword techniques to exploit armor gaps and leverage their opponent's weight against them. Far from chaotic brawls, these encounters were highly structured, demanding keen observation, rapid decision-making, and instinctive execution. Historical manuals detail intricate sequences designed for armored engagements, illustrating that intellectual and strategic preparation was essential. A single misstep could prove fatal, underscoring that mental agility and precision were just as crucial as physical strength. Shields were multifunctional, serving both defensive and offensive purposes. They could block attacks, push or unbalance opponents, and create openings for counterstrikes. Different shield designs, including kite, heater, and round shields, offered specific tactical advantages. Chronicles frequently describe coordinated shield use within units, demonstrating that spatial awareness, teamwork, and strategic application amplified weapon effectiveness. Shields allowed knights to manipulate engagements, protect allies, and maintain momentum, showing that effective combat depended on both individual skill and coordinated action. Psychological tactics played a pivotal role in medieval warfare. Knights leveraged feints, deceptive movements, and the intimidating presence of full armor, banners, and charging horses to unsettle adversaries. Chroniclers report that fear and hesitation could amplify the effects of weapon strikes, giving disciplined knights a decisive advantage. Weapon mastery was intertwined with psychological insight, allowing knights to exploit perception, manipulate enemy responses, and create opportunities for strategic attacks. Combat was thus as much about controlling the mind of the opponent as it was about delivering blows. Environmental conditions heavily influenced tactics and weapon choice. Mud, hills, forests, and narrow passages dictated movement and engagement strategies. Cavalry charges could lose effectiveness in soft or uneven terrain, prompting reliance on swords, axes, or maces for hand-to-hand combat. Close coordination with infantry and archers became essential, as environmental factors could create bottlenecks or obstacles. Skilled knights adapted techniques and strategies to terrain, demonstrating that effective weapon use was inseparable from situational awareness and environmental mastery. Armor shaped both defense and offensive strategy. Plate armor offered protection, but limited mobility, requiring precise, energy-efficient strikes. Maces and warhammers delivered concentrated force to incapacitate armored opponents, while swords exploited gaps and joints. Knights understood this interaction, using armor to maximize survivability while selecting weapons and tactics that exploited opponent vulnerabilities. The relationship between armor and weapon choice highlights the strategic sophistication of knightly combat. Communication and coordination amplified battlefield effectiveness. Horns, banners, hand signals, and prearranged strategies ensured unit cohesion and precise execution. Mounted charges required spacing and timing, while dismounted knights worked with infantry and archers to control vital points. The integration of strategic planning, tactical execution, and weapon mastery reveals medieval warfare as a complex, coordinated system rather than a series of individual duels, emphasizing that collective action was as important as personal skill. Training reinforced all these aspects, from childhood as pages and squires to tournaments and battlefield drills. Knights developed physical skill, mental discipline, and strategic thinking. Repetitive practice under realistic conditions cultivated instinctive reactions, endurance, and split-second decision-making. Knights became highly adaptable warriors, capable of navigating unpredictable combat scenarios with precision and composure. Their rigorous preparation transformed them into elite soldiers whose mastery extended beyond weapons to encompass strategy, resilience, and leadership. Finally, knights balanced chivalric ideals with pragmatic warfare. Honor, loyalty, and courage were central to their identity. But effective weapon use required calculated, strategic action. Every strike, thrust, or defensive maneuver reflected ethics, skill, and situational awareness, demonstrating that knightly combat was multidimensional. Studying how knights wielded their weapons provides a detailed understanding of their intelligence, strategy, and resilience, showing that they were disciplined, adaptable, and formidable warriors beyond the romanticized legends. As battles wore on, the interplay of endurance, skill, and tactical intelligence became crucial for knights navigating the chaos of medieval warfare. Unlike the orderly duels often portrayed in stories, real combat was unpredictable, with threats coming from every direction. Knights had to remain vigilant while managing exhaustion, injuries, and the cumbersome weight of armor. Historical records from battles such as Crécy and Poitiers demonstrate that even elite knights could falter under prolonged exertion, highlighting the importance of stamina, situational awareness, and strategic pacing. Each swing, thrust, or block had to be deliberate and calculated, ensuring energy was conserved while maintaining maximum battlefield effectiveness. Weapon versatility was a cornerstone of knightly survival. The longsword allowed for slashing, thrusting, and parrying in both mounted and foot combat. Axes, maces, and warhammers delivered concussive power capable of breaching armor, while lances provided devastating impact during coordinated cavalry charges aimed at disrupting enemy lines. Medieval manuals, including those by Johannes Liechtenauer and Fiore de Liberi, emphasized the importance of fluid transitions between weapons depending on opponent, terrain, and tactical objectives. Adaptability was often more decisive than brute strength, allowing knights to respond quickly to changing circumstances and seize fleeting opportunities during combat. Close quarters engagements required precision, observation, and rapid decision-making. Knights employed grappling, joint manipulation, and half-swording techniques to exploit weaknesses in armor and leverage opponents' momentum. Far from uncontrolled brawls, these confrontations were highly tactical, demanding both physical skill and mental agility. Historical treatises detail complex sequences designed for armored combat, demonstrating that intellect and strategic foresight were as important as strength. A single misstep could be fatal, underscoring the critical role of discipline, anticipation, and instinctive execution in real battle scenarios. Shields served multifaceted purposes, functioning as defensive tools, offensive instruments, and aids in formation tactics. They could absorb attacks, unbalance enemies, and create openings for counterattacks. Different shield types, kite, heater, round, provided specific tactical advantages, depending on positioning and terrain. Accounts from medieval chronicles describe coordinated shield use to enhance weapon effectiveness, demonstrating that spatial awareness and teamwork were critical. Shields allowed knights to manipulate engagements, protect allies, and maintain momentum, reinforcing that battlefield success depended on coordination as much as individual combat ability. Psychological tactics were as important as physical ones. Knights used feints, deceptive movements, and the imposing visual presence of full armor, banners, and mounted charges to unsettle opponents. Chroniclers note that fear and hesitation could amplify the effectiveness of weapon strikes, providing strategic advantages without direct engagement. Combat thus became a contest of both mind and body, with weapon use integrated into broader psychological strategies designed to destabilize and dominate the enemy. Environmental factors significantly influenced combat strategy. Terrain, obstacles, and weather dictated movement, weapon choice, and engagement methods. Cavalry charges were less effective on uneven or soft ground, requiring knights to switch to swords, axes, or maces for hand-to-hand combat. Coordination with infantry and archers became essential in constrained spaces or difficult terrain. Skilled knights adapted their weapon use and tactics to the environment, leveraging conditions to their advantage while mitigating potential risks, demonstrating that mastery of battlefield conditions was inseparable from effective combat. Armor shaped both defense and offensive technique. Plate armor offered considerable protection but limited agility, necessitating precise, energy-efficient strikes. Maces and warhammers provided concentrated force against armored opponents, while swords targeted weak points in joints or plate gaps. Knights understood how to combine protective armor with effective weapon deployment, demonstrating the strategic sophistication inherent in medieval warfare. Every maneuver reflected careful calculation, balancing offense, defense, and stamina. Communication and coordination were essential to battlefield success. Horns, banners, hand signals, and prearranged tactics ensured unit cohesion and timing. Mounted units executed coordinated charges, while dismounted knights worked with infantry and archers to control critical points. This integration of planning, real-time communication, and weapon mastery illustrates that medieval combat relied on collective strategy as much as individual prowess, highlighting the complexity and interdependence of knightly operations. Training reinforced every aspect of knightly effectiveness. From childhood as pages and squires to full-armored sparring and battlefield simulations, knights developed skill, resilience, and strategic thinking. Repetition under realistic conditions instilled instinctive reactions, endurance, and quick decision-making, enabling knights to maintain precision and composure in unpredictable combat scenarios. This rigorous preparation produced elite warriors capable of integrating weapon skill, strategy, and adaptability seamlessly. Finally, knights balanced chivalric ideals with practical combat realities. Honor, courage, and loyalty were central, but effective weapon use demanded strategy and decisiveness. Every strike, thrust, or defensive move reflected a synthesis of ethics, skill, and situational awareness. Studying how knights wielded their weapons offers insight into their intelligence, adaptability, and resilience, revealing them as disciplined, strategic, and formidable warriors beyond the myths and romanticized legends. As battles dragged into hours or even days, the role of endurance, mental acuity, and strategic weapon use became increasingly critical for knights. Unlike the dramatized duels in literature or film, medieval combat was unpredictable, multi-directional, and relentless. Knights had to maintain awareness of enemies, allies, terrain, and fatigue while operating under intense pressure. Historical accounts from engagements like the Battle of Agincourt and the Battle of Bannockburn highlight that even highly trained knights could succumb to exhaustion or injury, emphasizing that survival depended on stamina, careful energy management, and tactical pacing. Each action, whether swinging a sword, thrusting a lance, or performing a defensive maneuver, needed to be deliberate, balancing effort with battlefield effectiveness. Weapon versatility remained a cornerstone of effective combat. The longsword provided adaptability, enabling slashes, thrusts, and parries both on horseback and on foot. Axes, maces, and warhammers delivered concentrated force necessary to damage or incapacitate armored opponents, while lances delivered devastating impact during coordinated cavalry charges designed to break enemy formations. Period manuals by Johannes Liechtenauer and Fiore de Liberi emphasize transitioning seamlessly between weapons and techniques based on situational needs. Success relied not on brute force alone, but on careful observation, quick judgment, and the ability to exploit fleeting opportunities created during combat. Close combat engagements demanded precise timing, situational awareness, and mental agility. Techniques such as grappling, joint manipulation, and half-swording allowed knights to exploit gaps in armor or leverage opponents' movements against them. These encounters were far from chaotic. They were highly tactical, requiring split-second decisions and practiced execution. Historical sources detail sequences of actions designed to maximize efficiency and survival in fully armored conditions, revealing that intellectual preparation was as crucial as physical strength. A single misstep could prove fatal, underscoring the combination of skill, discipline, and strategy required for medieval warriors. Shields played a dual role in both defense and offense. They absorbed strikes, disrupted opponents' balance, and created openings for counterattacks. Different shield types, including kite, heater, and round, offered tactical advantages depending on position and battlefield conditions. Chronicles frequently describe coordinated shield usage to enhance the effectiveness of other weapons, demonstrating that teamwork, spatial awareness, and strategy were inseparable from individual combat skill. Shields allowed knights to manipulate engagements, protect allies, and maintain momentum, reinforcing the importance of integrated action on the battlefield. Psychological tactics were integral to the knight's arsenal. Feints, deceptive maneuvers, and the visual and auditory impact of charging armored cavalry often induced hesitation or fear in adversaries. Chroniclers note that psychological pressure amplified the effectiveness of weapon strikes, giving disciplined knights a tactical edge. Combat became as much a contest of perception and influence as of physical strength, showing that weapon mastery extended beyond mechanics to the strategic management of the opponent's reactions. Environmental factors shaped both strategy and weapon selection. Terrain, weather, and natural obstacles dictated how knights moved and engaged. Cavalry charges were less effective on uneven or muddy ground, prompting reliance on close combat weapons such as swords, axes, or maces. Coordination with infantry and archers was crucial in constricted spaces or forests. Skilled knights adapted techniques and tactics to terrain, demonstrating that situational awareness and environmental mastery were inseparable from effective weapon use. Armor influenced combat strategy, dictating both defensive and offensive approaches. Plate armor offered significant protection but limited mobility, requiring precise, energy-efficient movements. Maces and warhammers delivered concussive power, while swords targeted vulnerable gaps in joints and plates. Understanding the interplay between armor and weapon usage allowed knights to maximize survival while applying maximum offensive potential, highlighting the calculated and sophisticated nature of medieval combat. Communication and coordination magnified effectiveness on the battlefield. Horns, banners, hand signals, and prearranged maneuvers ensured unit cohesion and timing. Mounted units executed precise charges, while dismounted knights collaborated with infantry and archers to control key zones. This blend of tactical planning, real-time communication, and individual skill demonstrates that medieval warfare was a coordinated system where collective strategy reinforced personal combat ability. Training was relentless, emphasizing both physical skill and mental resilience. From early years as pages and squires to armored sparring, drills, and tournaments, knights cultivated endurance, reflexes, and rapid decision-making. Repetitive practice under realistic conditions instilled instinctive responses, allowing knights to act decisively under extreme pressure. Their preparation ensured adaptability and proficiency across a range of combat scenarios, blending technical skill, strategy, and mental fortitude seamlessly. Finally, knights balanced the ideals of chivalry with practical considerations of survival. Honor, courage, and loyalty were central, but effective weapon use demanded careful strategy, precision, and judgment. Every strike, parry, and maneuver reflected ethics, skill, and situational awareness, demonstrating that knightly combat was multidimensional. Studying their techniques and weapon strategies provides insight into their intelligence, adaptability, and resilience, portraying them as disciplined, strategic warriors beyond the romanticized myths of medieval legend. As battles extended over long hours, knights faced the dual challenge of physical exertion and strategic decision-making, where every action could mean life or death. Unlike the orderly duels often depicted in literature, real medieval warfare was chaotic, unpredictable, and relentless. Knights had to monitor multiple threats simultaneously, manage exhaustion and injuries, and maintain the mental clarity needed to adapt on the fly. Accounts from major engagements like the Battle of Crécy and the Battle of Poitiers emphasize that even the most seasoned knights could falter under prolonged pressure, highlighting that stamina, concentration, and judicious energy management were essential for survival. Each swing of a sword, thrust of a lance, or block with a shield had to be deliberate, balancing power and precision. Weapon versatility was crucial for knights to respond effectively to varied combat scenarios. The longsword offered adaptability, enabling slashing, thrusting, and defensive maneuvers on both horseback and foot. Axes, maces, and warhammers delivered concentrated force to penetrate or disable armored opponents, while lances provided devastating impact during coordinated cavalry charges intended to disrupt enemy formations. Manuals by Johannes Liechtenauer and Fiore de Liberi stress fluid transitions between weapons, reflecting the importance of adaptability over sheer strength. Successful knights could assess changing circumstances, switch weapons seamlessly, and exploit weaknesses in both the enemy's armor and their formation. Close combat engagements required extraordinary skill, timing, and awareness. Grappling, joint manipulation, and half-swording techniques allowed knights to exploit gaps in armor and leverage opponents' movements against them. Far from chaotic melees, these encounters were highly tactical, demanding rapid decision-making, observation, and instinctive execution. Historical treatises describe detailed sequences for armored combat, illustrating that intellectual preparation and mental acuity were just as critical as strength. A single miscalculated move could prove fatal, emphasizing that precision, discipline, and strategic thinking were integral to knightly effectiveness. Shields played multifaceted roles in both defense and offense. They absorbed blows, unbalanced opponents, and created openings for counterattacks. Different shield types, including kite, heater, and round shields, offered specific tactical advantages depending on positioning and combat conditions. Medieval chronicles describe coordinated shield usage to reinforce other weapons, demonstrating that spatial awareness, teamwork, and strategic application amplified a knight's effectiveness. Shields allowed knights to control engagements, protect allies, and maintain momentum, highlighting the interconnectedness of individual skill and unit cohesion. Psychological tactics were integral to combat success. Feints, deceptive maneuvers, and the intimidating presence of armored knights, banners, and mounted charges often caused hesitation or fear in the enemy. Chroniclers note that psychological pressure amplified the effect of physical strikes, providing a critical advantage. Effective weapon use was inseparable from understanding human behavior on the battlefield, turning perception and intimidation into tactical tools that could determine the flow of engagement. Environmental factors dictated both weapon choice and tactical approach. Terrain, obstacles, and weather conditions influenced movement and engagement strategies. Cavalry charges lost effectiveness on soft, uneven, or muddy ground, forcing reliance on close combat weapons such as swords, axes, or maces. Coordination with infantry and archers became crucial in constrained or forested areas. Skilled knights adapted their techniques to suit the terrain, leveraging conditions to their advantage while mitigating vulnerabilities, demonstrating that situational awareness and environmental mastery were essential to effective combat. Armor shaped both defensive and offensive tactics. Plate armor offered substantial protection but limited mobility, requiring precise, energy-efficient strikes and movements. Maces and warhammers delivered concentrated concussive force, while swords targeted gaps or joints. Knights leveraged their own armor while exploiting vulnerabilities in opponents, showcasing the strategic sophistication of medieval combat. Every maneuver reflected careful planning, balancing offense, defense, and endurance. Communication and coordination were central to maximizing battlefield efficiency. Horns, banners, hand signals, and prearranged tactics maintained unit cohesion and timing. Mounted charges required precise spacing, while dismounted knights coordinated with infantry and archers to control critical zones. This combination of strategy, communication, and weapon mastery illustrates that medieval warfare was a coordinated system rather than isolated individual efforts, emphasizing that teamwork enhanced personal combat effectiveness. Training reinforced all aspects of knightly skill, from childhood as pages and squires to armored sparring, tournaments, and battlefield drills. Knights honed endurance, reflexes, and tactical thinking. Repetitive practice under realistic conditions developed instinctive reactions, enabling knights to act decisively in high-pressure scenarios. Their preparation ensured adaptability and proficiency across diverse combat situations, blending technical skill, strategy, and mental fortitude seamlessly. Finally, knights balanced the ideals of chivalry with practical demands of warfare. Honor, courage, and loyalty were central, but survival required calculated, strategic use of weapons. Each strike, parry, or maneuver reflected ethical consideration, technical skill, and situational awareness. Studying knightly weapon use offers insight into their intelligence, adaptability, and resilience, portraying them as disciplined, strategic warriors beyond the romanticized legends of medieval lore. As battles dragged into prolonged engagements, knights faced the constant challenge of balancing physical stamina, mental focus, and tactical judgment. Unlike dramatized portrayals of duels, real medieval warfare was chaotic, multidirectional, and punishing. Knights had to maintain situational awareness, manage exhaustion, cope with injuries, and adapt to unpredictable threats while coordinating with allies. Historical records from battles like Agincourt and Bannockburn highlight that even elite knights could be overwhelmed by fatigue or injury, emphasizing the critical importance of energy management, concentration, and deliberate action. Each swing, thrust, or defensive maneuver required precision and strategic timing to maximize effectiveness while conserving strength for extended combat. Versatility with weapons was essential for survival and success. The longsword enabled knights to slash, thrust, and parry in both mounted and dismounted combat. Axes, maces, and warhammers provided the concentrated force needed to breach armor or incapacitate opponents, while lances delivered devastating impact during organized cavalry charges designed to disrupt enemy formations. Medieval manuals, including works by Johannes Liechtenauer and Fiore de Liberi, emphasize fluid transitions between weapons and techniques, highlighting that adaptability often determines success more than brute strength. Effective knights could assess battlefield conditions, switch weapons seamlessly, and exploit openings in both enemy formations and armor with precision. Close quarters combat demanded skill, timing, and acute awareness. Techniques such as grappling, half-swording, and joint manipulation allowed knights to exploit vulnerabilities in armor and leverage opponents' momentum against them. Far from uncontrolled brawls, these encounters were structured, tactical, and mentally demanding. Historical treatises describe detailed sequences for armored engagements, illustrating that intellect, observation, and anticipation were as vital as strength. A single miscalculated action could prove fatal, demonstrating the importance of disciplined execution and strategic decision-making. Shields were crucial tools with both defensive and offensive applications. They could absorb blows, disrupt opponents' balance, and create openings for counterattacks. Different designs, kite heater and round, offered tactical advantages depending on combat context. Chroniclers describe coordinated shield use within units to enhance weapon effectiveness, emphasizing that spatial awareness, teamwork, and planning were integral to success. Shields allowed knights to manipulate engagements, protect allies, and maintain momentum, proving that individual skill was inseparable from collective battlefield coordination. Psychological warfare amplified the effectiveness of knights' weapons. Feints, deceptive maneuvers, and the intimidating visual of armored cavalry often induced hesitation or fear among enemies. Chroniclers note that psychological pressure could make attacks more effective by exploiting hesitation or panic. Combat required mastery over both the physical and mental dimensions of battle, where perception, timing, and intimidation could turn the tide as decisively as a sword or mace. Environmental conditions dictated tactical decisions and weapon choice. Terrain, obstacles, and weather influenced movement, positioning, and combat strategies. Cavalry charges could be neutralized by soft or uneven ground, necessitating close quarters combat with swords, axes, or maces. Coordination with infantry and archers became critical in forests, narrow passes, or uneven terrain. Knights adapted techniques to suit environmental conditions, leveraging advantages and mitigating vulnerabilities, demonstrating that effective weapon use depended on situational awareness as much as skill. Armor shaped both defense and offensive capability. Plate armor provided substantial protection but limited mobility, requiring precise, energy-efficient strikes. Maces and warhammers delivered concussive power, while swords targeted gaps in joints and plates. Knights leveraged their armor and understood their opponent's protection to maximize offensive and defensive effectiveness. This interplay reflects the sophisticated tactical reasoning behind every maneuver on the battlefield. Communication and coordination enhanced combat effectiveness. Horns, banners, hand signals, and prearranged strategies maintained cohesion and timing. Mounted knights executed precise charges, while dismounted fighters coordinated with infantry and archers to control key positions. This combination of strategy, coordination, and weapon mastery illustrates that medieval warfare was a complex system where teamwork amplified individual combat effectiveness. Training reinforced all elements of knightly combat, from early years as pages and squires to armored sparring, battlefield drills, and tournaments. Knights developed endurance, technical skill, reflexes, and strategic thinking. Repetitive practice under realistic conditions allowed for instinctive reactions, quick decision-making, and adaptability. Knights became elite warriors capable of executing complex maneuvers under extreme pressure, seamlessly integrating skill, strategy, and resilience. Finally, knights balanced chivalric ideals with practical combat realities. Honor, courage, and loyalty were central, but survival required calculated and strategic weapon use. Each strike, parry, or maneuver reflected ethics, skill, and situational awareness. Examining knightly weapon strategies reveals their intelligence, adaptability, and formidable prowess, presenting them as disciplined, strategic warriors beyond the romanticized legends of medieval history. As battles extended for hours or even days, knights had to manage not only their physical strength, but also mental focus, tactical awareness, and the strategic application of their weapons. Unlike the simplified duels often portrayed in literature and film, real medieval combat was chaotic, multi-directional, and relentlessly dangerous. Knights were constantly aware of threats from multiple opponents, environmental challenges, and the need to coordinate with allies while enduring exhaustion and injuries. Historical accounts from major conflicts like the Battle of Agincourt and the Battle of Crécy illustrate that even veteran knights could succumb to fatigue or misjudgment, emphasizing that endurance, careful pacing, and deliberate tactical decision-making were as important as raw strength. Every strike, thrust, or block had to be measured to maximize effectiveness while conserving energy for sustained combat. Weapon versatility was a critical factor in a knight's survival. The longsword allowed for a wide range of offensive and defensive actions, including slashing, thrusting, and parrying, both on horseback and on foot. Axes, maces, and warhammers provided concentrated force capable of penetrating armor or incapacitating heavily protected opponents, while lances offered devastating impact in coordinated cavalry charges designed to break enemy formations. Manuals by Johannes Liechtenauer and Fiore de Liberi highlight the importance of fluid weapon transitions and adaptability, showing that effective knights combined technical skill, situational awareness, and strategic judgment. They could assess the battlefield, switch weapons seamlessly, and exploit weaknesses in armor or formation with precision. Close-quarter combat demanded acute timing, awareness, and tactical thinking. Techniques such as grappling, half-swording, and joint manipulation allowed knights to exploit armor gaps and use their opponent's momentum against them. Far from chaotic melees, these engagements were highly structured and mentally demanding. Historical treatises describe sequences designed for fully armored encounters, revealing that intellectual preparation and quick decision-making were as crucial as physical prowess. A single misstep could be fatal, highlighting the importance of discipline, anticipation, and strategic skill in medieval warfare. Shields served both defensive and offensive roles, providing protection while enabling counterattacks. They could absorb strikes, unbalance opponents, and create openings for follow-up actions. Different shield designs, kite heater, and round offered unique advantages depending on positioning and battlefield conditions. Chronicles recount coordinated shield usage within units to enhance weapon effectiveness, demonstrating that teamwork, spatial awareness, and strategy were inseparable from individual skill. Shields allowed knights to manipulate combat, protect allies, and maintain momentum, proving that battlefield success relied on both personal mastery and coordinated action. Psychological tactics played a vital role in medieval warfare. Feints, deceptive movements, and the imposing sight of armored knights, banners, and mounted charges often caused hesitation or fear among adversaries. Chroniclers note that this psychological pressure could amplify the effectiveness of weapon strikes, giving disciplined knights a decisive advantage. Combat was therefore as much a contest of perception, influence, and intimidation as it was a physical confrontation, showing that weapon mastery extended beyond mechanics into the realm of strategy and human behavior. Environmental factors heavily influenced weapon choice and tactical decision-making. Terrain, obstacles, and weather conditions dictated movement, engagement strategies, and the effectiveness of cavalry charges. Soft or uneven ground reduced the impact of mounted attacks, requiring reliance on swords, axes, or maces for close-quarters combat. Coordination with infantry and archers became crucial in forests, narrow passes, or other constrained spaces. Adaptability to environmental conditions was essential, demonstrating that effective weapon use was inseparable from situational awareness and tactical foresight. Armor shaped both defensive and offensive strategies. Plate armor offered significant protection but limited mobility, requiring energy-efficient movements and precise strikes. Maces and warhammers delivered concussive power, while swords targeted vulnerable points such as joints and armor gaps. Knights leveraged their armor while understanding opponents' defenses to maximize offensive potential, showcasing the strategic sophistication and foresight inherent in medieval combat. Communication and coordination magnified battlefield efficiency. Horns, banners, hand signals, and prearranged strategies maintained unit cohesion and timing. Mounted charges demanded precise spacing, while dismounted fighters coordinated with infantry and archers to control critical points. This integration of planning, communication, and individual skill illustrates that medieval warfare relied heavily on coordinated collective action, highlighting the complexity and interdependence of knightly combat. Training was rigorous, encompassing both physical conditioning and mental discipline. From childhood as pages and squires to armored sparring, battlefield drills, and tournaments, knights developed reflexes, endurance, strategic thinking, and technical skill. Repetition under realistic conditions built instinctive responses and decision-making capabilities, allowing knights to act decisively in high-pressure situations. This comprehensive preparation produced warriors capable of integrating weapon mastery, strategic foresight, and resilience seamlessly. Finally, knights balanced chivalric ideals with practical combat requirements. Honor, loyalty, and courage were central to their identity, but survival demanded strategic, precise weapon use. Each strike, parry, or maneuver reflected ethics, skill, and situational awareness. Studying how knights wielded their weapons provides insight into their intelligence, adaptability, and formidable prowess, presenting them as disciplined, strategic warriors beyond the myths and romanticized depictions of medieval history. As battles stretched on, knights were constantly tested in terms of stamina, focus, and tactical judgment, where every decision could mean survival or death. Unlike the romanticized duels in literature or film, medieval warfare was chaotic, unpredictable, and multi-directional. Knights needed to remain alert to threats from multiple opponents, environmental obstacles, and the movements of allies, all while coping with exhaustion and injuries. Historical records from major battles like Agincourt, Bannockburn, and Crecy illustrate that even the most seasoned knights could falter under prolonged exertion, highlighting the necessity of endurance, energy management, and calculated decision-making. Each swing, thrust, or defensive action had to be measured for maximum effect while conserving energy for sustained engagement. Weapon versatility was fundamental to a knight's effectiveness. The longsword offered adaptability, allowing slashing, thrusting, and parrying in both mounted and dismounted scenarios. Axes, maces, and warhammers delivered the force needed to compromise or incapacitate armored opponents, while lances could devastate enemy formations during coordinated cavalry charges. Treatises by Johannes Liechtenauer and Fiore de Liberi emphasize seamless transitions between weapons, showing that adaptability and judgment often outweighed brute strength. Skilled knights assessed conditions, switched weapons efficiently, and exploited weaknesses in armor and formations to gain an edge. Close-quarter combat required precision, observation, and rapid decision-making. Techniques like grappling, half-swording, and joint manipulation allowed knights to exploit vulnerabilities in armor and leverage an opponent's momentum against them. These engagements were far from chaotic. They were structured, strategic, and mentally demanding. Historical manuals describe detailed sequences for armored encounters, revealing that intellect, anticipation, and strategy were as critical as physical power. One misstep could prove fatal, demonstrating that discipline and skill were inseparable from effective weapon use. Shields played both defensive and offensive roles, absorbing blows, unbalancing opponents, and creating openings for attacks. Different types, kite, heater, and round offered unique tactical advantages depending on positioning and battlefield conditions. Chronicles frequently describe coordinated shield use, showing that spatial awareness, teamwork, and strategy were integral to battlefield success. Shields allowed knights to control engagements, protect allies, and maintain momentum, proving that personal skill alone was not enough without cooperation and coordination. Psychological tactics amplified the effectiveness of weapons. Feints, deceptive maneuvers, and the imposing sight and sound of armored cavalry often caused hesitation or fear in enemies. Chroniclers note that psychological pressure could make attacks more effective by exploiting hesitation or panic. Combat was thus as much a battle of perception, influence, and intimidation as it was of physical strength, revealing the multifaceted skill required for knightly success. Environmental factors heavily influenced tactics and weapon selection. Terrain, obstacles, and weather dictated movement and engagement. Cavalry charges were less effective on soft or uneven ground, requiring reliance on close combat weapons like swords, axes, and maces. Coordination with infantry and archers became critical in forests, narrow passes, or difficult terrain. Knights adapted techniques and strategies to leverage environmental advantages while mitigating risks, showing that situational awareness was essential to effective weapon deployment. Armor shaped both defensive and offensive strategy. Plate armor offered significant protection, but limited mobility, demanding energy-efficient and precise movements. Maces and warhammers delivered concentrated concussive power, while swords exploited gaps and joints. Knights combined their armor and understanding of opponents' defenses to maximize offensive and defensive potential, highlighting the calculated and sophisticated approach to battlefield tactics. Communication and coordination magnified effectiveness. Horns, banners, hand signals, and pre-arranged strategies maintained cohesion and timing. Mounted knights executed precise charges, while dismounted fighters coordinated with infantry and archers to control critical areas. This integration of planning, real-time communication, and individual skill illustrates that medieval combat relied on coordinated collective action as much as personal proficiency. Training was intensive, covering both physical conditioning and mental acuity. From childhood as pages and squires to armored drills, battlefield simulations, and tournaments, knights developed reflexes, endurance, technical skill, and strategic thinking. Repetitive practice under realistic conditions instilled instinctive reactions and split-second decision-making. allowing knights to act decisively under extreme pressure. Their preparation ensured adaptability across diverse combat scenarios, integrating technical skill, strategy, and resilience. Finally, knights balanced chivalric ideals with practical combat needs. Honor, loyalty, and courage were central, but survival required strategic, precise use of weapons. Every strike, parry, or maneuver reflected ethical consideration, technical mastery, and situational awareness. Studying their weapon techniques provides insight into their intelligence, adaptability, and formidable prowess, portraying them as disciplined, strategic warriors far beyond the romanticized legends of medieval history. As the final phases of battle unfolded, knights were pushed to the limits of endurance, skill, and strategic thinking. Unlike the orderly duels often romanticized in stories, medieval warfare was chaotic, relentless, and unpredictable, requiring constant attention to multiple threats, allies, positions, and terrain while managing fatigue and injuries. Historical records from battles like Agincourt, Bannockburn, and Crecy show that even the most experienced knights could be overwhelmed by exhaustion or tactical misjudgment, demonstrating that survival relied on stamina, careful energy management, and precise decision-making. Every sword swing, lance, thrust, or shield maneuver had to be executed deliberately, balancing power, timing, and conservation of strength for prolonged combat. Weapon mastery remained at the core of knightly survival. The longsword offered flexibility for slashing, thrusting, and parrying on foot or horseback. Axes, maces, and warhammers provided the force necessary to breach armor, while lances delivered devastating impact in cavalry charges designed to disrupt enemy formations. Manuals by Johannes Liechtenauer and Fiore de Liberi emphasize fluid weapon transitions, showing that adaptability often outweighed raw strength. Skilled knights assessed battlefield conditions, switched weapons seamlessly, and exploited openings in armor or enemy lines with precision and calculated timing. Close quarters combat demanded a blend of physical skill, observation, and rapid decision-making. Techniques like grappling, half-swording, and joint manipulation allowed knights to exploit armor gaps and leverage opponents' momentum. These encounters were structured, tactical, and mentally demanding. Historical treatises outline detailed sequences for armored combat, demonstrating that intellect, anticipation, and strategy were as critical as strength. A single misstep could be fatal, highlighting the integration of discipline, skill, and tactical foresight. Shields served dual purposes in both defense and offense. They absorbed blows, disrupted enemy balance, and created openings for counterattacks. Kite, heater, and round shields each offered tactical advantages depending on context and positioning. Chroniclers describe coordinated shield use to amplify weapon effectiveness, underscoring the importance of teamwork, spatial awareness, and planning. Shields allowed knights to control engagements, protect allies, and maintain momentum, showing that personal skill alone was insufficient without coordinated action. Psychological tactics complemented weapon mastery. Feints, deceptive maneuvers, and the imposing sight of armored cavalry banners and charging horses often induced hesitation or fear in opponents. Chroniclers note that psychological pressure magnified the impact of weapon strikes, giving disciplined knights a decisive edge. Combat required not only physical skill, but also mastery over perception and influence, making weapon use as much a mental art as a physical one. Environmental conditions dictated strategy and weapon choice. Terrain, obstacles, and weather affected movement, engagement, and the effectiveness of cavalry charges. Soft or uneven ground limited mounted attacks, requiring close combat weapons like swords, axes, and maces. Coordination with infantry and archers became critical in forests, narrow passes, or challenging terrain. Knights adapted their tactics to leverage environmental advantages while mitigating vulnerabilities, showing that situational awareness was inseparable from effective combat. Armor influenced both defensive and offensive strategies. Plate armor offered substantial protection but limited mobility, demanding energy-efficient and precise movements. Maces and warhammers delivered concentrated force, while swords exploited joints and gaps. Knights leveraged their armor while assessing opponents' defenses to maximize efficiency, demonstrating the strategic sophistication of medieval combat. Communication and coordination magnified battlefield effectiveness. Horns, banners, hand signals, and prearranged strategies maintained cohesion and timing. Mounted knights executed precise charges, while dismounted fighters coordinated with infantry and archers to secure vital positions. This integration of planning, communication, and individual skill underscores that medieval warfare was a collective endeavor where teamwork enhanced personal combat capability. Training was rigorous and continuous, emphasizing both physical conditioning and mental acuity. From childhood as pages and squires to armored drills, battlefield exercises, and tournaments, knights developed reflexes, endurance, technical skill, and strategic thinking. Repetition under realistic conditions honed instinctive reactions and rapid decision-making, enabling knights to act decisively under extreme pressure. This preparation ensured adaptability across diverse scenarios, integrating skill, strategy, and resilience seamlessly. Ultimately, knights balanced chivalric ideals with practical combat requirements. Honor, loyalty, and courage were central, but survival depended on strategic, precise weapon use. Every strike, parry, and maneuver reflected ethics, skill, and situational awareness. Studying their weapons and techniques provides insight into their intelligence, adaptability, and formidable prowess, revealing them as disciplined, strategic warriors far beyond the romanticized myths of medieval legend. As we reflect on their skill, strategy, and endurance, it's clear that the art of knightly combat was a complex interplay of mind, body, and weapon mastery, a legacy that continues to fascinate history enthusiasts today.